Hey, Jen.
Hey, Dana.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hypnosis.
And beyond. Today we have Adam Cox. He is the host of the world's most popular podcast, The Hypnotist. He also regularly works with celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty.
Hi, Adam.
Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. We so appreciate it. We've been so excited to get to speak with you. You are a pretty well known figure to a lot of people in our world. But what about all the people who don't know who you are? Can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so you could probably tell from my accent, I'm British, so live very close to London, and I'm most well known for being a host of a podcast called The Hypnotist. And The Hypnotist is kind of different from a lot of hypnosis podcasts because generally I'm not interviewing guests. What I tend to do is I share real hypnosis based on real client issues, but protect the confidentiality of the client. And what that does is it gives the audience the ability to experience what I consider real hypnosis, whereas a lot of what's on YouTube and recordings are kind of scripted voiceover stuff. And for me, I consider real hypnosis something you do with the person in front of you, with a client. And that I think is what makes it different. So I guess the easiest way um, to describe me is a British hypnotist that has a podcast called The Hypnotist.
I like it. And do you find that you get clients that have the same sort of issue all in a row? Like, do you get crops of a certain issue, or do you specialize in something? How does that work?
When I started, I specialized in weight loss and phobias mainly. And that was the two things because my belief system when I started about 12 years ago is that the medical industry was very much focused on changing body parts. So, kind of if you think of bariatric surgery, so gastric sleeves and bands and those kind of things, or medication. And obviously with those MPIC, it's quite popular now. But my belief is that if you're going to help someone to lose weight, you're better off dealing with the cause, like what's the original reason why they have certain habits and those kind of things. And because I had very extreme phobias growing up, I thought, yeah, I'm going to help people with phobia. So when I started, it was that. What happened in COVID, though, is that I had a very nice therapy room in a very prestigious part of London. And when COVID came, I knew that clients weren't going to be seeing me face to face. So I thought, right, let me close down this kind of lease agreement on that therapy room. And I thought I really wanted to keep having an outlet for hypnotherapy even during the pandemic. And I thought of the idea of a podcast. So what actually happened originally, I was sharing lots of phobia and weight loss podcast episodes, and that was getting me clients with phobias and weight loss. But every now and then I would work with a client that had something quite unique and quite different. And then whenever I published an episode like that, I would then get more people discovering me because they had that issue. So, it's very, very wide. But when I started, it was very much weight loss and phobias.
Do you notice a thread underneath most issues? Like, do you think that most things boil down to anything, or do you find that everything is just really unique and there aren't commonalities?
I would say both. I mean, every client is unique. Where I would say there is commonalities is that the brain is pretty good at trying to solve problems, but sometimes the coping strategy that it comes up with paradoxically gives them the very thing that they're looking to avoid. So if you think of a phobic, for example, a phobic quite often has an unpleasant experience, and the brain does not like that at all. And it says, right, to help you avoid this unpleasant thing happening again, you're going to pay way more attention to this thing that you want to avoid. And now they end up thinking more and noticing more the very thing that causes the anxiety. So I would say sometimes it's a well-intentioned coping strategy that actually makes things worse. Sometimes it's just one disempowering belief. I would say at least a third of all my weight loss clients somewhere have the belief that they're just not good enough. And they're in this kind of cycle where the part of them that believes that they're not good enough doesn't believe that they should be happy, confident, and slim, but eating food makes them feel better. So they're in this kind of cycle. So part of what I consider my job to be is to play detective and say, right, where did all this come from? When was it not like this? Because I believe that if you can deal with the cause rather than the effect, you're more likely to make long-term change. And that's the opposite of the pharmaceutical industry, that in many cases couldn't care less about the cause, and they just come up with a medication to treat the symptoms. And I think as hypnotherapists, much better to deal with what's causing this rather than just giving them suggestions to make them feel better in the moment.
Mm. Do you use different techniques to get at that cause, or do you, what sort of is, how do you explore that with people in general? I know it's different, of course, but do you have some techniques that you are your go-tos?
Asking questions is my main technique. And one of my favorite questions is, depending on what the issue is I say, if I were you for the day, how would I do what you're doing? And that's a strategy elicitation question. It's out of the NLP playbook, but you can look at what people do as kind of an internal pattern or strategy. And I think most people think they have to know why, but actually how is much more important, because if you know how they do it, then it becomes easier to figure out what to change. And then you're just adjusting a pre-existing neural pathway rather than trying to create a brand new neural pathway. So the analogy I use for a lot of people with, let's say, emotions that are triggered by something, and that might be something that causes anxiety, or it might be something that causes a compulsive behavior, is almost like a line of dominoes. And my job is to find out what's the first one or two dominoes that fall that create this sequence, and then figure out where to interrupt the pattern and then reroute it to a more resourceful way. So questions, I think, is the best way, and listening. Quite often, the client tells you what's happening. So you might have a client that is very stressed, and they literally say, and I just tell myself, like, you're a piece of shit, like you can't do anything right. They're telling you, they're in a dialogue, and I think sometimes it's just paying attention. And when you pay attention, it becomes obvious what to do. And then even paying attention, if they've got inner dialogue, is it stated in a first or third person? If the inner dialogue is saying you've got a disassociated part. And if it's I, it's associated. And that's the same way visually. If they relive a traumatic memory from a first person perspective, they're associated into that memory. And if they see themselves looking like someone else, they're disassociated. And I think association and disassociation is one of the key things that you can take high levels of an intense undesirable emotion and just dial it down very, very quick, just by changing the perspective or giving a part a different role to play.
Fascinating. And so then do you find that an issue somebody comes to you for initially is the issue, or is there usually something else behind it then?
I mean, there's a great phrase in hypnotherapy: the issue is never the issue, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. Quite often, the issue that the client presents with is their coping strategy. Someone might be overweight, they might be drinking too much, they might be taking recreational drugs. So they think they just want to quit that thing, but then you figure out actually they're doing it to connect with themselves. They're doing it to make themselves feel better. So I would agree with the statement. Not that the issue is never the issue, but the issue is normally never the cause of the issue that they're dealing with. And from my perspective, why not treat the cause of the problem, because then it's gonna be a long-term solution. Whereas if someone's feeling depressed, you could do a hypnotherapy session that makes them feel good in the moment. You just get them associating into resourceful states, but you need to know how they're getting depressed consistently. And that might be, in a dialogue, telling themselves they're useless, what's the point in trying? And it's like, well, you want to deal with that rather than give them a temporary experience that makes them feel better for the session. Much better to make the change so that whatever's causing that low mood or that depressed state doesn't keep coming back again and again.
So how do you how do you forward pace, or how do you check future pace to know that you have gotten to that point and not just made them feel good?
Yeah, almost every. So I must have published about 1,800 and something episodes of The Hypnotist, and almost every single client session ends with future pacing. And I start the future pacing disassociated. So say, right now, when you think about your future, I want you to see yourself. What do you do when you've got a craving? What do you do when you're in a social situation? Like, I want them to see themselves like someone else first, because they don't have the evidence that they can access that yet. But we want to kind of sow the seed that it's possible, and then step into that and feel what it would feel like to actually be that. So, for example, if someone's afraid of public speaking, for example, and they just see themselves on a stage confidently performing, that's a great stepping stone, but it's not quite enough, because when they're actually doing the speech, they're not going to be seeing themselves like there's someone else. They're actually going to be looking at the audience in front of them, in which case you need to associate into the resource state. So that's one way that you do it. And the second way is you test with the client. You might set them homework. You might say, right, between now and the next session, let's test this out to make sure it's actually working the way that you want. So I had a client that wanted to reduce the amount of alcohol they were consuming, and we did a great session. And she came back and she's like, well, it kind of worked, but it didn't, because a friend popped around with a bottle of wine, and then this happened, and then this happened. So then for me, that's a feedback loop. And that next session was using this metaphor of snakes and ladders, but now she knew exactly where the snakes were. So she could then preempt those things. And I said, right, now when a friend pops over with a bottle of wine, like, what do you say? And it's kind of like, okay, not for me, no thanks. I'm having this. Do you want some? So she could rehearse that, and then it was a case of, right, can you imagine that actually happening? Like, imagine the friend knocking at the door. Who's it likely to be? What do they have? And mentally rehearsing that, because once they've done it in their head, in science they have this idea of in vivo and in vitro. They do the test in the test tube before they do it in reality. So it's good to do that with clients. It's like, the future pacing can only give them an essence of what it's going to be. Reality is where the rubber meets the road. So I don't look at it as the hypnosis is only effective if everything happens perfectly. It's real life is the way that you turn thoughts and priming into real neural pathways. And then once they've done that experientially, of course, they're more likely to do it again. So I treat real life as the real test of any change.
Do you give clients audios to listen to as a standard operating practice, or is that only for some clients, or is that part of your your protocols?
Yeah, it's part of what I do, and that's originally where the podcast came from. Because uh, as you could probably tell, like I'm an audio geek. I love all this kind of stuff, and I had this. I don't know if I've got it around here at the moment, but I have this like portable microphone. So when I was seeing clients face to face, even then I would have a studio quality microphone. I would hold it, I would do it to them, and then record it in really good audio quality, and then I would send them it afterwards. But what it meant is that I had 200, kind of hypnosis recordings. And originally I thought, oh, okay, I can launch this podcast already having 200 hypnosis recordings that is just my voice. The problem was, when I started, I had so many weight loss clients, a lot of the recordings were very, very similar. And then what I needed to do is to kind of, right, okay, have some variety there, And then, I got creative and made movie inspired hypnosis sessions. But for me, my belief system is that if you're seeing clients face to face, you need a therapy room. If you're seeing clients online, as most of my clients are, you need a recording studio. So one of the benefits of having a recording studio is that I can do the session. They hear good audio quality from me, and they can see me well, but I can capture that audio in studio quality and then send that to them. So that does two things. One, it's added value for the client, but it also means they've got not a generic recording, because I know some hypnotherapists, they say, okay, right, we've done the session, and then I'm going to email you some pre-recorded sessions, from before. But that's not for the client. The client needs what is calibrated and kind of customized to them. So every time I work with a client and do a hypnotherapy session, they get the studio quality recording of that session.
Love it. That's really powerful. So in terms of your podcast, then, do you see yourself continuing in this, you know, doing hypnosis sessions on there, or do you see that changing over time? Or I mean, I know it's working, so I'm just curious where you see that
Yeah.
going in the future.
I'm having way too much fun at the moment to change it. So and I've got this cycle, like you know this from having a podcast. Like one of the most difficult things is to build an audience. Once you've got an audience, it's easier to grow an audience, but actually building it initially can be quite challenging. And I'm in a fortunate situation that because of what I've done, I have I think over 51,000 followers on Spotify. I think there's about 20,000 on Apple. So it means that every month I've got about 400,000 downloads, and that gives me a good base. So I just share my hypnosis sessions, protecting the confidentiality of the client. That generates me more clients, which then generates more sessions. So it's this wonderful, kind of flywheel where the busier I get, the busier I get. And, from a financial perspective, that doesn't make sense because it's difficult to scale your time if you're only working with clients one on one. Except for me, I enjoy it too much. So I don't look at it as, right, is this the best way to scale my brand? It's kind of like, no, I love working with clients one to one. So if I just get busier working with clients one to one, that's fine. But because I have a recording studio, I'm also creating digital courses because not everyone can afford to work with me. So you want to have something where if clients can work with you, they can. But if they can't, they get a digital clone version of me doing the sessions for them, which makes me more accessible. But I'm a hypnotherapist, and hypnotherapists do hypnotherapy with real clients. And I think one of the paradoxes that you have in the hypnotherapy world, and we were at HypnoThoughts, sometimes a talented hypnotherapist then starts doing conferences, starts doing talks, they become a trainer, and then they end up doing less work with clients. And then effectively, you lose that sensory acuity, you lose that calibration, and then effectively you're saying stuff which becomes less and less experiential because you've become a teacher rather than a therapist. And for me, I teach and I do courses, but I'm a hypnotist, I'm a hypnotherapist. Like that's what I do. So, I would never, the day I retire from hypnotherapy is that I physically can't do it anymore. Like outside of that, I'll keep doing it because I was having a conversation with someone and they said, being a hypnotherapist is like a cheat code for life because you get paid to do something incredibly fulfilling that's creative, it's intellectually stimulating. You actually make a difference in people's lives. There's no downside. And there's lots of professions that can't say that. They get the money, but they don't really like what they do. They're kind of ashamed of it. And hypnotherapy is a wonderful thing that I can't really see a downside. So it's kind of like, I'm happy to be as busy as I can be because I know it's doing good. And it also has that ripple effect with me that beyond the clients that I'm working with, one of the most wonderful things about the podcast is that I'll see in the comments and I'll see messages from people that I'll never meet. They'll never meet me, they'll never talk to me, but they say in the message, lost 30 pounds of weight, stop smoking weed, drinking way less. And that's just a ripple effect of me working with the original client, but people out there are hearing this stuff and it's actually helping them too. And that's, what a wonderful time to live, to be able to have the ability to do something like that.
It would be really interesting to hear how you got into hypnosis. What made you,
Yeah.
brought you to this field?
What brought me? I was fascinated by psychology quite young. So I was a very shy, introverted child. And only later in my 20s, I kind of pieced it together that belief that I talked about with a lot of my weight loss clients, not feeling that they're good enough, I had that belief, a deep conviction, not just a belief, but a strong conviction that I just wasn't good enough without defining what enough was, but I believed it anyway. And, but I was also quite resourceful. So if you genuinely believe that you're not good enough and you don't want to stay that way, then it creates this motivation to get better. And, I had a love of learning. So as a child, I would read books on lots of things that I thought would make me better. And that might be exercise. I remember reading books on mnemonics. I learned to speed read when I was about 12 years old. And by speed reading young, you can learn more stuff quickly. And I thought, okay, well, I want to accumulate knowledge. Reading books on investment quite young. So I had this kind of desire to do that stuff. And the first book I read on hypnosis was a book by Ormond McGill on stage hypnosis when I was about 12 or 13. And there I am doing like little arm catalepsy tests and the locking fingers and the magnetic fingers. And, I didn't realize why they were working. It doesn't explain in the book, but of course there's certain kind of physical things, but it is the confidence and the congruency of the language. So all of these things were being planted quite young. The irony for me is that where it really changed was when I was 18 years old. I left home to study psychology as a degree, and during that time, I had very, very severe social anxiety. So I had these kind of horrible rashes over my face and my chest, and that led me to avoid people. And then effectively I became a recluse. And I knew at the time, because I knew a bit, about psychology, that if I would have gone to my doctor and said, like, I'm feeling this way, they're either going to diagnose me with generalized anxiety disorder or depression and basically put me on meds. And I knew I didn't want that. So instead, being a recluse, I was avoiding people. But the university I was in had a 24-hour library. So I would kind of basically become a vampire. I would like sleep in the day and then at nighttime go to the library and just consume everything that I could on different therapeutic modalities and those things. And, it kind of went from, to use almost like a bit of a cliche as an extreme, but I was suicidal at that point, generally considered like ending my life, to thinking, right, I've got nothing to lose now by testing this stuff out. And it was hypnosis and the early NLP approaches that really I found was effective for me. And I went from being, very shy and introverted and anxious and all these kind of skin conditions to actually getting to a point of being very confident and very a strong level of belief in my own abilities. And when you're 20 years old, and you start actually getting confident and you've never had that before, you're not interested in being a therapist. I was interested in making money, and dating. Like that was the thing that I was interested in. So I had a couple of jobs, but then I set up my own business at 23 years old. The money I made from my business, I invested. So technically I was a self-made millionaire at the age of 27. And in my mid 30s, came across this concept called ikigai, because I didn't really feel fulfilled with my PR agency that I'd built and the investments that I had. And I asked myself the question, what is it that I think about and I'm interested in, even though it's nothing about money and nothing about anything else? And it was still psychology. It was hypnosis. It was these things. So literally the next day I signed up for a hypnotherapy course. And what really changed for me is that when I was learning hypnotherapy and becoming a hypnotherapist, it was almost like there was unlocking a secret level in my life that I didn't know existed. And then suddenly everything got better. I felt happier, I felt more confident, more aligned. And every hypnotherapist knows that whenever they work with a client, they're not just helping the client, they're extracting the insights from the client to themselves. So it's kind of like you see the patterns, and someone might be addicted to something else, but it might be a different addiction to me. So since I've become a hypnotherapist, I think I'm healthier. I think I'm happier. I quit drinking alcohol about 7 years ago. My life has got better, but it all came from being this kind of very anxious nerd of a child, essentially.
Wow, thanks for sharing that with us. A lot of people believe that, when we come across as a hypnotist, maybe don't bring your story, but do you share your story with your clients?
If it's relevant,
Like as a means of kind of, yeah.
yeah, if it's relevant. So when I'm working with an anxiety client and I tell them when I was a recluse that my heart would be up to 140 beats per minute just by opening the door, they connect with that. They know it's lived experience rather than just kind of words. So yeah, absolutely. And I had a fear of public speaking. Obviously, if you're afraid of people, public speaking is quite a daunting kind of thing. So I share what my experiences were, but also what I did to overcome it. Not just saying, oh, I did hypnotherapy myself, which doesn't say anything, because most people want to hear the story of the convincer strategy. Like, what did you do to prove to yourself that that fear is gone? So when I had a fear of heights, yeah, I did the work on myself, but then I did a skydive because I thought you can't do a skydive and still be afraid of heights, particularly if you do it more than once. And I had this fear of public speaking, and I did this speech at the age of about 23, 24 to 500 people in the Savoy Hotel. So I think that becomes evidence of the change. It's not that you can just say that you've changed. It's like it's doing the thing. And that was really helpful in the years leading up to COVID, because I would do these monthly spider phobia workshops. And at the end, we would get these lifelong arachnophobes holding a tarantula. Now, it's not useful to hold a tarantula, particularly for people in England. There's not many tarantulas. We're not in the Brazilian rainforest. But where it's really useful is to give them evidence of the change. And then they've got a reference that if they held a tarantula, now when they see that spider in their kitchen sink or in their bathtub, they feel resourceful to cope because they can think back to that very vivid memory of them holding a tarantula and then give themselves the inner narrative that, well, if I did that, I can definitely handle that situation. And that makes them feel resourceful in a moment that they wouldn't be resourceful. So I think sharing personal anecdotes is a really useful thing to do for for clients, because one of the things I was always not dismissive of, but had a credibility issue with, is incongruency. And one of my early hypnotherapy teachers did a masterclass on weight loss and was massively overweight. And I'm thinking, right, there's incongruency here. And another one of the teachers, they clearly had like a nervous twitch, and I'm thinking it doesn't quite sit right for me, because there's a great Gandhi quote which is, be the change that you want to see in the world. And I think as hypnotherapists, we have got not an obligation, but I think it's a good example to set that we've experienced all of this stuff and we've got through it. And if we can do it, then they can do it. We're not superhuman. And I think some hypnotherapists, and I would also say life coaches as well, operate behind this facade of somehow they're perfect and they've got all the answers. And I think that's so disingenuous. Like, I call bullshit on that, and I speak all the hypnotherapists. Like, hypnotherapists have loads of problems too. Like, no one's perfect. But I think when you talk about how you've got from where you've been to where you're going through, and can articulate why and how you've done that, that can actually give a lot of confidence to clients.
Agreed. I mean, your story, I would have never thought of you as somebody who would lack confidence. You have like such an incredibly popular podcast, and you're so good at what you do. By the way, I do use your recordings. I've told Dana that, and I'm really enjoying them. So thank you.
Amazing. That's lovely to hear.
Well, and with that, that brings us to our next segment, which is our silly subconscious question. And our question for you today, Mr. Adam Cox, is if you had an animal sidekick, what would it be and why?
So I've never thought about it as a sidekick. I always considered my spirit animal to be either a rhino or a wolf, just because I think, you know, they're not brash animals. It's not like a parrot or a peacock like trying to seek attention, but there is this kind of element of they're capable and they're real and they're playing by their own rules, if that makes sense. So as a sidekick, though, I'd want something that complements my skill set. So I'm thinking a very well trained tiger. I think that'd be a useful, as long as it was entirely loyal to me and it was a genuine sidekick. I'd say that's a powerful resource to have.
Nice. Well, that brings us to our next question. Beyond what we've talked about today, is there something you'd like to share with the audience about you?
Yeah, I think the thing I would share is that it's good to challenge yourself. Like I heard this metaphor of the comfort zone, that actually when you feel that discomfort or awkwardness or kind of thing, like that's a clue that you're at the edge of your comfort zone. And that actually, rather than that being like an electric fence that you have to kind of run away from, it can actually be something that if you experience the discomfort, do the thing anyway, then your comfort zone expands. And and interestingly, it doesn't expand only in that direction. It kind of expands proportionally in all directions. So one of the things that I did when I became, you know, let's say more well known in the UK, so I was featured in a few magazines and TV shows, and they use this phrase phobia guru, and I had full on imposter syndrome of like thinking very, felt very uncomfortable with that because I had this fear of doing stand up comedy, and I thought, who am I to be, this guru of helping people with phobias when I have this? So I thought I've got to change that. So I signed up for this comedy school, and then on opening night, you do this showcase, and there was 100 people there in this comedy club in East London, Bethnal Green. If anyone knows London, it's like a dodgy East End of London. There's 100 people there, and I've got my 5 minutes of material. And I'd love to say I had no anxiety whatsoever. I had full on anxiety, but it wasn't going to deter me because I knew I was beyond my comfort zone. And I did that 5 minutes and I got some good feedback. I even got a client at the end of it because one of my jokes was about erectile dysfunction. And a guy stopped me in the bar afterward and he's like, "Do you really help people with this area?" So I ended up getting a client after doing 5 minutes worth of stand up comedy. And then I kept on doing it. I did it because I wanted to have no anxiety whatsoever. And I kept on doing it. And some nights went well, some nights didn't go so well. But I finally got to a point where I could just get up and kind of do my 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it was fine. And I was never the best in the open mics, and I was never the worst. I was all in the middle. But it dawned on me that this isn't my passion. I was only doing it to kind of banish the anxiety. And then at that point, what am I doing this for? So I'd say hopefully that's a useful thing to know about me. But I would say the key lesson I got from that is that you've got to lean into what you're passionate about. And the key catalyst for me to kind of stop doing stand-up comedy was to realize that I'd met my goal of doing it to begin with. And then I just met someone that had no desire to be a stand-up comedian and was just effortlessly funny. And they're like, that's their genius. And I'm pretty good at weaving hypnotic stories together. You know what? I should just do the thing that I'm really passionate about. And I would say anyone listening, like there'll be something that just people are amazed at how good you do that thing. Like that's the thing you should be doing more. Like do that.
It's an amazing message.
Great
Thank you.
message. I love it. Well, we so appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us today. And we hope you'll come back again. And with that, Jen, what do we always say?
Peace out.
Peace out.
Peace out.